Hello, everyone. Good to see everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So,
Hi, Chris.
hey. So, we are live on YouTube as well as on Zoom. So, welcome to everybody from YouTube and, of course, from Zoom. So, just wait a few moments for a few extra people that seem to be coming in. I would just ask to keep your mic on mute just for this introduction, then we can go into maybe a discussion if anybody has any questions or want to have a dialogue. Okay. So welcome to this Naturality refresher. The word naturality is pointing to that which is natural. So the natural isness of life, you could say. Now, the natural isness of life includes those things that you might think of as being artificial, like phones, laptops, anything that seems to be man-made. That is only happening within the kind of story or the dream of how the artificial self interprets life. Really, everything that seems to be taking place as a laptop, just as taking place as the sky or the sun or a body, is all really just the play of the totality. So the totality is like the oneness. The totality is all that is, the allness of life. You could also say that it is like emptiness. So it is emptiness that is also playing as all the forms, it is really the forms. So naturality, that word is kind of indicating a return back to the natural isness of life, which is completely free. And it is a mystery. It cannot be known, it cannot be understood, because anything that you would try to understand with would only be something limited, like a concept or an idea. So you've kind of got two sort of realities happening. You've got the natural reality, the natural isness of life, which is a mystery and cannot be known, that is taking place as all seeming things, all phenomena, including the body and the sense perceptions and the thoughts and the emotions. And then within that, you have this kind of bubble of experience, an artificial experience that I call the artificial self, of being like a separate center that is cut off and isolated from the totality. And in that artificial sense of self, it's like a dream, it's like a hallucination, a mirage. The experience in that is one of duality and opposites and polarity. And in that experience, it lives in a kind of story, a personal story, in which it is telling itself that life is happening to it and that it is separate from things and that it is lacking something and that it has to control things to fulfill itself, to get more of something and become more of something, and also to protect itself from things that it thinks are separate from what it is. So you have the natural reality, the isness, the totality, and then you have a bubble of experience within that, the artificial self. And this artificial self is actually not real. The artificial self is a fiction, a phantom, a mirage. But there seems to be a sense of it. So there is a sense of self, an artificial sense of self. But just because there is a sense of self does not mean that there really is a self, does not mean that there really is a solid, separate center. And so kind of what's been spoken of here and discussed here is to highlight that, to point that out, to look at the mechanics of how this artificial self operates, and to, as best as is possible, to point to the natural reality. And so in this kind of interaction and the way that we are sort of discussing this, what can happen is that there can be a kind of a loosening of that artificial sense of self that feels very solid and real. For the artificial sense of self, everything feels very real. Because it feels real, it perceives everything else as real. It feels as though separation is real. It feels as though lack is real. It feels as though control, personal control, is real. It feels as though time is real. And so it feels as though its story is real. So the interpretation and the narrative that it has, the experience of being an artificial separate self, all feels very real. Just in the same way that you can be dreaming at night and it feels like the dream is real. Feels as though you are a real character in the dream and things are happening to you in the dream, and maybe it's a pleasant dream, maybe it becomes a nightmare. And so the artificial self has this kind of up and down experience of what it would call positive and negative. But ultimately, it is not real. It's an illusion. So in this kind of conversation, this can point out and highlight the illusory nature of it, in which it can loosen up. There may be a loosening of that. And there may also be a kind of a shift, an energetic, a sense shift, going from a more condensed state in that artificial sense of self into a more unlimited, back into the unlimited freedom of the totality. And that is not an experience, it's not a state. It's energetic in nature. And so because of that, it cannot be brought about by some kind of effort from this artificial sense of self. Because the self cannot get rid of itself, an illusion cannot get rid of an illusion. So somehow things may loosen up in this discussion, in this dialogue, and potentially a shift can happen. And so really that's what is being discussed here. And in this artificial sense of self, it feels like it's constantly searching for something. Because it feels separate, it feels lack. So it's trying to become more, it's trying to search for more. And on the surface, It has all of these kind of wants and desires. It seems to be governed by its fears and desires. The fear is coming from the need to protect, or the fear of not getting what it thinks that it needs or wants. And the desire is coming because of its projection that certain things that it chases in life will fulfill it in some way and make it whole and complete. And society does a good job of reinforcing that idea of chasing things to become more whole and complete. And so really the whole society is kind of built on that falsity, that one day you will be complete and whole, or that you will find freedom in what you would think of as the world. And the idea the artificial self has is that it's always in the next moment or in the future, it's in time. So this story that it operates through, its experience of time, is going from the past and getting a sense of identity from the past and the things that have been done and achieved in the past, and its interpretation of what it would call as the present, which is also just another aspect of time. The now, the present, is also just another aspect of time. It's like a slice of time at a certain moment. And its idea of the future and thinking it's going to get something in the future. And so it is often imagining something more and projecting something, this idea of becoming more and having more in the future. And that experience is very dualistic in nature, and it's filled with the ups and downs and the highs and the lows. It's like a bipolar experience. And so when it gets what it wants, it is happy for a while, satisfied for a while. When it doesn't get what it wants, it becomes unhappy, dissatisfied. And so what it's trying to do is constantly seek constant pleasure and satisfaction by rearranging circumstances to be a certain way, and to try to fit in and find its place in what it thinks of as life. And so that is the dream, the hallucination that it's operating in. That's its experience. And so the artificial self cannot touch the natural isness of life. It's completely sort of in its own bubble of experience. And that bubble may pop, may come to an end. There can be a shift back into you could say, this unlimited freedom. And sometimes we refer to this as doubtless freedom. And what that points to is that it's a freedom where there is no longer any doubt. Not that there is certainty. That's an opposite to doubt. Certainty and doubt are two sides really of the same coin. They're both part of that dualistic experience, because certainty is a sense that you know what you are, what life is, and it cannot be known. So really it's more like an unknowing or an unlearning or an unbelieving rather than a believing, learning, or a knowing. So there's no certainty in this. It's not that you arrive at a place of certainty. It's just that you are free. There is a freedom from doubt. When there is no longer the sense of this artificial self, of separation, what goes with that is doubt. All doubts go. Because you no longer have to think or believe something to be the case, because then it is just the way that it is. That freedom is obvious. So there's a kind of recognition when this energetic shift happens, there's a recognition that the totality is already free. that freedom already is and has always been that way. And that cannot be imagined, cannot be understood, because that recognition is like night and day between between that freedom and between the experience of the artificial self. So this is really what we are speaking about. And the artificial sense of self, because it feels as though it is lacking something, it's in constant seeking and searching mode. And in normal society, it's been searching for things in what society is generally prescribed as what you should be searching for to become complete. What often seems to happen is people become disillusioned with that, and then they go seeking, searching for truth or for freedom or happiness in spiritual pursuits. So that could be religious, that could be psychedelic, that could be some spiritual tradition, could be enlightenment. And there is still a sense of seeking something and trying to understand something and get something more. And so there's a lot of misconceptions that can happen in this seeking. Like the idea that this liberation is an experience or a state, or you arrive at some kind of special knowledge. And of course, it cannot be any of those things, and it will not be any way that the artificial self thinks it will be, or the seeker thinks it will be. So that's what we're talking about. I'll open it up to any potential discussion, comments, questions for those on Zoom or on YouTube. And what might happen is potentially there might be moments where nothing feels to be shared, and that's okay. It's okay just to be with, or to allow, so to speak, things to be as they are. And maybe something might come up. Maybe a question may come up, maybe a comment may come up, and that's where we can then have a discussion about that.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, Karen.
Hi. Hi, Christopher. Very interesting. Yes, this artificial sense of self, which is not real, and the natural reality, this natural isness.
Mm-hmm.
And now my questions. There's a lot of evil on the earth, and now my question: do human demons live on this earth with this consciousness? Is this also artificial self, or is it their consciousness, their dark consciousness?
Mm. Well, good and evil is something that is within that dualistic story of the artificial self. So it is always creating these distinctions of good and bad, right and wrong, black and white, good and evil, positive and negative. And so within that story of the artificial self, it can seem like there are good people, bad people, good and evil. And what can happen is that it gets pulled into judgments about that and trying to change that, or trying to side with being good or trying to be good, or thinking of itself as doing something bad or being bad. And so that can seem to happen within that story, but really there is no real good or evil. There really is no right or wrong, good or bad. It's all within the totality. Now, what could be said is that when one is operating in that artificial sense of self, because it is a dualistic experience, and because it believes in good and bad, right and wrong, you could say that then actions that would seem to come from the artificial self may be something that is what would be seen as being harmful to others. And so when one returns, you could say, back to this natural isness, it's like being in alignment, you could say, again, with the totality. And likely, but not necessarily always, likely in that alignment, there will be no, there's certainly not an intention from something personally to harm something else. But what might happen, it could be perceived on the outside as still being good, bad, right or wrong, positive or negative. Really, there are no rules. So the idea of angels and demons, good and evil, positive, negative, that is only happening within that story of the artificial self, in that experience of it.
So that means you have always the choice somehow, or not?
Well, who is it that thinks that they are the chooser or the decider?
Yeah.
Right? As a personal choice. The one that thinks that it has personal choice is the artificial self.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that is an illusion. There is really no personal decider. Everything that seems to be happening or being done or taking place is really just the totality. It's all a kind of play of the totality.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Vincent.
Oh, yeah. Hi, how are you?
Hey, Vincent, good to see you, mate.
Yeah, good to see you too. I was just listening to all what you were saying. Um, Essentially, the form and the formless, they both are coming from, they're both the totality of the energy, right? Form and the formless.
Well, the form is really the formless. It's not that there's two things, that one is form and one is formless. Actually, the form is the formless. They are the same.
Oh, I always thought there were two, the form.
Well, that would
Being,
be obviously a duality if there is two, you see. So it's like saying, oh, I thought there was a wave and there was the ocean. No, really, the wave is just the ocean. There's only the ocean, really. It
so,
just seems to take on the appearance of a form, of a wave.
okay. So if it's all one, totality of energy,
Yeah.
and everything that's appearing in your life, the artificial self, you know, all this is also part of the play, isn't it?
Everything that seems to be taking place,
Yeah.
well, the sun, the sky, the birds, the cars, the house, a room, a laptop, a phone, sense perceptions, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of it is an appearance of the natural isness of life or the totality.
So so as an artificial self, let's say I'm demanding a certain pleasure, remembering it, whatever it is, and I go after the pleasure. That whole thing, wanting it, desiring it, going after it, engaging in it, that whole thing becomes a play, right?
Well, that is that experience is also appearing, but it's built on a fallacy. It's built on an illusion, which is that there is an actual solid separate center that you would call a self or an I or a me, as if that is real, when really it is not. It's a complete fiction or a phantom.
So when we live our life, unfolding from this memory, that we are patterns, conditioning, if our life is unfolding from that, then it's an illusion, right? Because it's not unfolding from something real.
It's not there's nothing real at the center there. There's nothing real at the center, but the experience is still like an appearance of the totality.
Okay, the appearance is there, like me going to look for some pleasure because I'm bored. That appearance is there, but it is essentially coming, because it's coming from the artificial self, it's coming from an image.
It's built on an illusion.
It's built on an illusion.
Yeah. There's an energetic, so when you could say the body, there is the form of the body, that form, there can seem to be this a sense of a condensed energy, what seems like a more localized energy. And then what gets built on top of that is a story, a narrative, a whole complex identity, because it's based on the misperception that because there is a sense of a form, that there is an actual separate center there. But really, it's just that it's the totality playing as what seems to be a more condensed form. Because the totality is just unlimited, infinite energy, you could say. So it can play as seem to play as anything, take on any kind of so-called shape or form. But in reality, so to speak, it is always one. It is always unlimited. It is always free, even if it seems to be limited. So again, like a wave and an ocean, using that same thing again.
So the totality allows the functioning of the artificial self, creating illusions and all. It allows both. It allows that. And if you realize that and you come out of that, then you live a life based on something real, right? So totality is allowing both. It's allowing the illusions to take place, like it's giving you the freedom to be the artificial self, as well as awakening from it.
Well, there's nothing allowing that. There's nothing that can make it sound like maybe there's somebody there that's making a decision to allow or not allow.
No. I know there's nobody there, but just the very energy, is the freedom to be the artificial self or not the artificial self.
You could say, based on what you're saying, it's the freedom to either have the sense of self,
Yeah.
of a center, the sense of that,
Yes.
or what actually is, which is the unlimited freedom. But again, remember the self, there is really no self there. It's a complete fiction, it's complete illusion. So it's not there at all. So the totality is not playing as a self. It's actually not there at all. But the sense of self can be there.
Right.
So
So
that is part of, you could say, the appearance of the totality taking place as that, seeming to take place as that.
the sense, okay, let's stick with that. The sense of self okay, nothing is actually there, but the sense of self which is appearing, that's still part of the totality, though.
The sense of self.
Yeah, because nothing can be outside the totality, right?
Yeah,
the sense,
that's what I said. The totality is playing also as the sense of self, or a sense of self.
So one has to be really clear that the sense of self is different from claiming to be an actual self.
There can be a sense of self even though there is not a real self.
Yes. And the sense of self, it's only a sense of self. Nothing is actually there, though. That's what, I'm understanding.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I can feel the sense of self, but the illusion is, I think it is actually there, you see.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
That is the illusion.
The artificial self would think that because that is its experience. Yeah.
So the
So
artificial
can't
self
imagine
is not,
outside of that.
so the artificial self itself is not the problem, other than it taking itself to be actually there.
Yeah,
That is the real problem.
There's a strong sense that there is a real solid self, a real center.
Yes.
Yeah. In freedom,
Yes.
there is a recognition by it's not a personal recognition, there's a recognition that there is no self, there is no solid center.
So you can't have an artificial self without feeling the solid center, because that is the artificial self. You can't say, oh, I don't feel that I'm there.
The sense of self, yeah, is built on that whole illusion of a solid, separate center.
Yes.
Yes.
They go hand in hand.
And so it's like it reinforces itself. It's like a loop. And then the whole society is built on that. So that also encourages and reinforces that. So it strengthens, fortifies, reinforces itself. Is remembering what it thinks that it is.
And that's why it seems very difficult to get out of it, because of this feeling of actual self. So when you deny yourself something, you feel the pain. You don't want to deny it. You know what I mean? Because the sense of self claims everything, you say,
Yeah, that's it. It claims everything. It claims ownership. I am this, I am that. This is mine, that is mine. I want this, I want that. Me, my, and I is the mantra of the artificial self.
And that's why we cannot give up our indulgences, because giving up an indulgence, one feels like the death of the self.
Yeah, it has to be constantly searching and seeking because it feels as though it's lacking something. And so it's searching to become complete and whole, and it thinks that's going to come in the next experience or in the next pleasure or in the attainment of the next thing or the next goal, the next achievement. Trying to become things have something.
One last question is that when anxiety comes, something can go wrong in your life and you can be filled with anxiety. And this anxiety is the artificial self, which is immediately transferred to the sense of self that you feel you're there, actually feeling anxious,
But even anxiety, that sense, like when you say anxiety, what is that? Okay, so if you look at the sensation of the body, there'll be
you
a
feel some
sensation.
fear, some confusion, everything,
Like anxiety could easily be confused for excitement. Those feel actually the feeling, the actual sensation is not necessarily that different. Anxiety and excitement, but there is a description, interpretation of also how that is. But whatever that sensation is, it is just the totality. That's also the totality. And so really what's being indicated in what's being said here is that actually it all comes back to what is immediately taking place. The yearning, because there's a yearning underneath all of these wants and desires and fears that the artificial self has, there's also a deep yearning for the totality. A deep yearning, a deep resonance for the totality. And that seems to sort of move it towards seeking the totality again, the wholeness again, you know?
How does this artificial self have this yearning for the totality, if it's an artificial self? I mean, I have it. We're all having it. That's what we're here, you know?
Yeah.
As we're still yearning for it. So you're saying that yearning is coming from the artificial self. How does the artificial self contain that?
You could say that, yeah, there's a deeper resonance. That's what that yearning is, for that wholeness. And until that is sort of satisfied, if you will, which is only in liberation,
Yeah.
it will constantly be searching and seeking. So even if someone says, okay, I'm going to stop seeking, I'm going to stop searching, liberation or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, right? This wholeness. Even if it says I'm going to stop searching and seeking, it can't. There's no way. What might happen, and what does sometimes happen, is that through frustration, it then says, okay, I'll stop seeking, but actually it just starts seeking something else. Goes back to its wants and desires again. Secretly underneath, thinking or feeling like that's going to lead back to that wholeness. So it by its very nature of feeling separate, it's always constantly searching and seeking. And only in that liberation, which is the end of that artificial self, is there the end of that searching and seeking.
Okay, so you're saying that in its feeling of separation and isolation, the artificial self is automatically seeking.
Automatically seeking. Its nature is to seek, or it is a seeker or searcher. Yeah. The
But
very energy of it is to
right.
seek and search, because it
But if
feels
it is artificial, why would it be interested in seeking? If it's, I can understand something real seeking, but something artificial seeking.
well, really it's under it. Maybe there's some kind of sense, it seems, that it's not going to get what it's really looking for in those surface level things, in the temporary thing, and that it wants something permanent. It wants something lasting, you know. So somehow there's a kind of resonance or a sense, which is a mystery. We can't really pinpoint exactly. We can't say what that is, but there's some kind of sense or resonance, which is what that yearning is coming from, to go back to this totality, the infinity, infinite fulfillment.
Okay, let others ask questions. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Vincent.
I'll continue with this some other time.
Yes, cheers.
I hope everybody benefited by this.
Okay. So if anybody else would like to share or ask anything, you can just press the raise hand button, or I guess maybe you can just unmute the mic. Let's see if there are any comments or questions on YouTube. So Azur says, if you think, then you doubt. Jalaja, I think it is. I saw a video in which you spoke about living in free fall. It made a huge impact on me. Just stumbled upon this live stream and wonder whether you could speak again about free fall. Thanks. So free fall is where, again, there's not this sense of trying to control and manipulate things to try and get something that you think that you want. This is the artificial sense of self, right? This is what it's doing all the time. Because it feels separate, because it feels that it's lacking something, it tries to then control. So it tries to protect itself from what it fears to lose, and it tries to attain what it desires, what it thinks it can win or add to itself. And so it tries to control and manipulate. And again, the society teaches that you've got to be responsible. You've got to make things happen as a personal self. And so that can create a lot of pressure, a lot of stress or anxiety. And so in the absence of that artificial self, in that freedom, it's like complete free fall, meaning that there's no control there. There's no one trying to control anything. Now, the other side of that, sometimes what happens is the mind goes to, well, if it's not control, is it allowing? Have I just got to allow everything to happen? Actually, that is very subtly the same, two sides of the same coin. Who's going to allow anything? That's also like a subtle decision, still a form of control. Trying to get what it wants or thinking it can allow things to be as they are. So free fall is the absence of those two. No control, no allowing. It's already instantly what it is. The totality is already instantly what it is. So there's no question of allowing. There's no question of controlling. There's no separate center there to control or to allow. And so in that way, it's complete free fall. There's just a flow. It's not that you are flowing or there is someone that is flowing. Like sometimes it is said to go with the flow. You got to go with the flow. Who's going to go with the flow? These are, again, very subtle things that a spiritual seeker sort of accumulates these ideas. I got to allow, I got to accept, I got to go with the flow. I got to be with this or be with that. But it's, you see, it's all pointing still to the someone being there as a separate center. So there's still an effort in that. There's still some kind of trying in that. It's still like a subtle practice. But how can the totality practice being the totality? How can the totality accept? How can the totality allow when it is already that? Right? It's not two things. It's not two separate things. So in that way, it's complete free fall. It's all taking place by itself, you could say. So Azur says, transcendence of polarity, consciousness, yet not through transcendence or denial of what is called evil alone. One is a Mayism, the other is purity. Yeah, it's the end of polarity. The artificial self has this polarity of good, bad, positive, negative. It creates the opposites. All of that comes to an end. So Trey's Myths and Tunes asks, So would you say an enlightened person gets to experience moments of the unlimited totality within the limits of the little body? Well, actually, there is no personal enlightenment. There's no person, there's no self that gets enlightened, because enlightenment, if we're going to use that term, is really the absence of a person, the absence of a self. So it cannot be personal. There's no personal freedom, no personal enlightenment. And it's not an experience. And as the question asked, does it get to experience moments of the unlimited totality? No, it is just the unlimited totality. And it's not an experience, and there's not moments, because moments is like time. Past moment, present moment, future moment. Or you have to try to do something or be something moment to moment. But this freedom is completely timeless. The totality is timeless. So there is no question of a moment or a past or a present or a future. And it's not an experience, because the experience is within that sense of a self. That's the structure of experience. And there can be many different experiences that the sense of self has. All kinds of experiences. But this, the freedom, the totality is not an experience. So Trays, Myths and Tunes also says or asks, we only pass through enlightened experiences, question mark. Well, again, we would be pointing to some kind of separate center or self that then is passing through different experiences. So again, that's back in time again, that's back in separation again. Again, it's not an experience, and it's not something that's personal. It's unimaginable. You can't imagine. It's a mystery. It is a total mystery. It really is. It's often a cliche thing to say, but it really is a mystery. If you were not enlightened, Zo asks, if you were not enlightened, would you know it? If you were, would you not know it? That's a good one. Well, knowing means that you have knowledge of something. And knowledge is memory, is thought, is a concept, is an idea. So this totality cannot be encapsulated, cannot be captured or limited by any kind of concept or knowledge. So it can't be knowledge, it can't be a concept, which means you can't know it. You can't know it. So it's not a knowing. And there's no one there to know it, to have that knowledge. There's no one there to hold that knowledge, no one there to remember that knowledge. You could say maybe in a way that you come to know that you can't know. There's maybe a kind of understanding that you can't understand. Of course, more deeply, that there's no one there to understand. But somehow there is like a recognition, but it's not a personal recognition. So we have a hand raised. Jahira, is it Jahira again? I think. I forget how to pronounce the name.
Hi,
Hey, how do you pronounce it again?
Jahida.
Okay, okay. How you doing?
Good.
Good, good.
So, like the one guy said, like he said, if there's thinking, then there's doubt, but there could be thinking, like thinking about the measurements to bake a cake, and that's not doubt, but the thinking that's doubt is the thinking that's believing in some kind of like certain outcome of how something's going to turn out or how something could have been or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the doubt, is like there's like just thinking about like doing, you could do a math problem and think, or there's the thinking like, why is my husband talking to me like that? He shouldn't be talking to me like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes like I notice that like that happens, and then I think, well, I guess there is no right way, but like I know that whatever my reaction is, it's mine. It has nothing to do with what he's doing. But like I see like that I'm resisting what's happening and like how he is or how he's talking to me. But I guess in reality, I guess my point is that like sometimes I think, well, he's my husband, so I should tell him how I'm feeling and tell him why and this and that. But in reality, I could just um, say like what is at that moment instead of being defensive about it, but just being curious about like what's arising. And that's not thinking. That's like just noticing what's arising, right?
Well, when I said doubtless freedom, what's been spoken about there is doubt in relation to doubting the totality, and how the artificial self has all of these doubts about the totality and the unlimited freedom. So doubtless freedom is just pointing to how when the artificial self is no more, then what goes along with that is all the doubts in relation to that. But in terms of what you might say everyday life things, that continues on. It's practical things. There still can be thinking that takes place and happens, and knowledge used for everyday life tasks and everything like that. All that continues. The only difference is that there is no longer a sense of a solid, separate center that is lacking something. So everything else on the surface continues on, but it doesn't continue for a self or a personal self or center anymore. So anger might still arise, just as joy might arise. There can be silence as well as noise, no thinking as well as thinking, challenging situation as well as an easy situation. It's like all continues on the same, but without a center there. And you could say in a way, because there then is no center there, it is the contrast between those two is unimaginable. But in another way, it's like, well, it's just everything's the same. It's kind of a paradox like that. So if a reaction happens, that's just the totality. That's the totality as well. That's what's taking place as that reaction. There's nothing that needs to be done with it. There's no one there to do anything with it or has a choice to do anything with it. That is just what is
But
appearing.
there could be something appearing, noticing that
Noticing's
that
happening,
the
but
illusion wants to defend itself,
mm,
right?
sensing, noticing, all these things are also happening by themselves. There's nobody that's noticing, sensing. That's also taking place by itself, just as breathing is. Heart beating. You see, what happens is for the artificial sense of self, it feels like it's got to do something with what's taking place. I've got to rearrange it, I've got to change it, I've got to modify it in some way. But what is seeming to take place is just the totality. And there's no one there to change it, or that has to change, or that can do something with it.
But it might.
But there might be an action. Yeah, that an action might come. Yeah. And as long as there is a sense of a separate self, and it's probably going to keep trying to, in some way, change it, modify it, resist it, and so on. Allow it. Well, I'll allow it. I'll allow this. I'll allow that. But that just that's how it reinforces itself, by trying to control, which you can't help but do that, because there is a sense of being separate. So of course it's going to try to control and modify and change things. And so you could say nothing needs to be done about anything, because there is nothing there to do something about it. And what seems to be happening is the completeness itself taking place. So anger is just as much the totality as joy is. That's something that really the artificial self can't understand, that, because it's because it lives in that dualistic good, bad, right, and wrong. It has already judged certain things as being good, bad, right, and wrong. And so it thinks the things that are good it thinks the things that are bad or wrong, it has to change. And it thinks what it perceives as good or right, it has to hold on to.
And then suffering happens. And that's part of all of it too.
And then suffering happens, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's always suffering in some way. Even when things seem to be going the way that it wants it to go on the surface, maybe it seems to be living the most exciting life and the most fulfilling life. But it's like a bucket with a hole in it. No matter how much you fill that bucket up, it just keeps leaking out. So it can never get enough. It's never fully satisfied. And so only in that freedom, which is infinity itself, is there completeness and sort of total fulfillment, if you will. But not personally. Not for a nobody can have it. It's not something that can be had. It's something that is. And already is, actually.
What is already?
The fulfillment. The totality is already fulfilled unto itself. It's already fulfilled. So there's no need
Okay,
to.
and fulfilled could mean suffering.
Could arise as an experience of suffering. Yeah.
Okay. So when you
But if there's nobody there suffering,
oh,
that's the difference. If there's somebody there, who is the sufferer, you see? Who is the sufferer? Now it depends what we're saying when we say suffering, because if you say if you say physical suffering like pain, that
no,
continues. But
that's not right.
psychological, what you might call psychological or emotional suffering, when the artificial self comes to an end, that comes to an end as well. There's no suffering. There might be still unpleasant feelings, unpleasant emotions, what you might call unpleasant thoughts, but nobody then is suffering because there's nobody there to suffer. The sufferer has gone.
Oh,
So it's the end of suffering.
right, because there's no ownership of the suffering.
There's no one there to suffer as a separate solid center.
Yeah, there's no like, oh, poor me here suffering and with my story about why I'm suffering.
Yeah, that's it, the story, the personal story. The story comes to an end with the artificial self. When that ends, the story comes to an end, and the suffering then comes to an end.
Because the story.
But still, like space, a negative emotion might arise.
Which is just really a sensation.
Yeah.
That we put a label of negative on.
And it's made of the totality.
The sensation?
Yeah. All of it is made of the totality. Body, sense perceptions, emotions, feelings, thoughts, all of it. All of it. Underlying all of it is the totality, made of the totality.
And what makes it the form is the label of it. Like the form is like the solid, like the chair is like I can't put my hand through the chair or the desk. So it separate form.
Yeah, the artificial self creates that duality of where things feel like there is a form and that it is happening in relation to itself. There's a relationship.
But it's really empty without all of the definitions. It's empty.
Subject and object. So once the artificial self comes to an end, because it feels solid, then there's no solidity.
Right.
Which cannot
so that's what makes it empty.
Be imagined.
Yeah. But that's what makes it empty. That can only yeah. It cannot be imagined because the imagination is the self, kind of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because the artificial self is a sense and experience of being solid and separate, then that is what it experiences, everything as solid and separate.
Okay.
So then it's like, oh yeah, I'm bumping up against things. Because again, there's a sense of localization as well. You know, that's part of that sense of separation. It says, I am here and something else is over there. Subject, object. So subject bumps into object. That's solidity. But when there is no artificial self, then both subject and object are no longer there. There is just the totality.
So then when you're doing this, when you have your meetings and you have your retreats, you're just like moved to do that. You don't have like a goal in mind, or do you? Do you have it? Do you feel some sense of happiness or satisfaction when you witness other people waking up from the illusion?
Well, planning
Like
can
what?
still
Yeah.
take place. There can seem to still be, you know, all that can still continue the same, but it's just that there is no self there. There is no separate center there. So there's not a story that there is someone that is, you know, planning this retreat or is doing this work, and this work is good work or it's bad work or it's helping somebody and it's helping somebody separate and so on. All that kind of story is not there. So that it's just a flow. It's the totality flowing. as what would seem to be this particular body. But of course, it's no, that is just really obviously a mirage to the artificial self, that there are different separate bodies and this body's helping that body and so on and so forth. So it still continues the same, because I understand that that's the artificial self has all these questions which it can't know ultimately, but there's lots of fears and concerns. How will functioning continue? Right? Will all of a sudden will the body turn into like a vegetable, and not do anything?
No, I wasn't imagining that. But I used to think that, yeah, until I had that first little glimpse that I had. But like maybe I was just curious about your experience, or that what it's like, what you're just moved to, like, okay, yeah, we're gonna do this meeting, we're just gonna do this retreat, this is what's happening next. That's it.
Well, everything is spontaneous, even planning is spontaneous when there is no self.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, this is really impossible to imagine, because for the artificial self, it knows only its own experience of being there, so it can't possibly imagine or get a sense of it not being there, and then things functioning.
So do you think that, like, say my children, they have to go through the part where they experience a separate self, don't they? I mean, that's part of, like, apparently being this human on the practical.
It seems to be what happens. It seems that all cultures seem to go through, in some way, shape, or form, this kind of an artificial sense of self. Some could be maybe more complex than others, but yeah, it seems that all do.
Okay. Thanks.
Good speaking to you.
You too.
Okay. So it's just, if anyone wants to ask anything, then of course just feel free to raise a hand. Let's just look on the YouTube. Let's see. So adventure awaits says, you can't know, exclamation mark. This message came to me loud as my awakening began. I yearned to know it all, and the feeling I kept getting was, if you know, the whole game ends. Azor says, thinking opens the door to doubt, unless you doubt it. This touches on some Eastern beliefs, especially living in the present moment without thought. It's hard to explain something that doesn't have words. Yeah, it's impossible. It is impossible. But somehow in this kind of discussion, there seems to be some kind of there's an energy. And because there is no separation, because the energy is total, there's no distance, there's no time. So it's not that there has to be bodies in the same vicinity as each other. Just this interaction there's a resonance there because there's no time, there's no distance, there's no separation. Okay. So we'll give it another maybe 10 minutes or so.
I'll say something again if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you do like private calls with people?
Yeah, sometimes I speak privately with people, yeah.
And you basically just do this where you just talk about what you can't talk about, really.
Yeah. You see, we can speak about revealing the mechanics of the artificial self, how that sense of self seems to operate. And in that, maybe there can be a kind of loosening somehow. You know, it's like a tight screw the artificial sense of self is like a tight screw. And so somehow it can be sort of loosened a little bit, maybe. And what may happen is an energetic shift in which there is an absence. There seems to be these kind of what they would call in Zen like a satori, like a glimpse. Glimpses can happen, which is maybe a second where there's an absence of self. And then it seems to come back in. And then there can be an awakening where that sense of self, there's like a mood, like an oscillation between the sense of self and that experience and that story, and then no self, and this kind of movement between the two, in and out of the dream, you could say. And then liberation is where that whole hallucinatory dream self comes to an end.
Yeah, it sounds like the fetters. I'm sure you know about the fetters.
Yeah, fetters, of course, meaning sort of chains.
Meaning chains?
It's like a word for chain, isn't it? So certain things that
Oh,
seem to be chaining or binding,
yes, yes.
yeah, blocking.
It's like the illusion, the layers of illusion, kind of.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So like we said about separation, lack, control, time, these are some of the illusions. There seem to be some of the prominent ones that is within that artificial sense of self.
Yeah.
And they can sort of expand and end up extrapolating into many different areas of life for the artificial self in its story.
Yeah, I think when I first saw, I think that I saw when I had that kind of glimpse through the first few fetters. Can you give me one sec?
about my channel. I just met so many. Like I met like 10 game developers in one game. I met one of the most popular YouTubers in one game. I saw him, Connor 3D.
So fun.
It's pretty cool.
Cool.
And yeah, I'm also really, really hungry.
Okay, I'll be right there. Okay. That was my little boy that I was telling you about the other day.
Yeah.
So then when I had the glimpse, and then like I would go on like a call for like I'm part of this like homeschooling group because I homeschool them, and like it's a kind of unconventional way of homeschooling where the kids just basically learn what they're interested in when they're ready to learn it. There's no curriculum. I mean, you could use a curriculum if they wanted to, but it's basically just like letting them choose what they want to learn about. So I am part of this kind of group that of other moms that are doing it like that too. And then when I got on the call, I was just like, this is such a silly call because like all the questions are just like, help me fix this, like, or like, tell me what to do to fix this, or like, and I was just like, all these questions just are coming just from like the need to control this, like, so it was just, it felt so like silly to be on a call. Like I couldn't listen to the people's stories because they were all just stories. And I was like, this is silly. But I could see how that could still be, helpful anyways. But yeah, um, I guess that like if you were to talk to someone one-on-one and just like, yeah, you're just pointing them back to this like over and over again, or really, right?
Well, the artificial self, of course, because it exists in a story, it loves stories, and so it thrives on that. And we have a whole culture, of course, that likes that, and that's why people maybe like the movies and things like that. And there's nothing wrong or right with that. Just as there's nothing wrong or right with anything, but it likes that because it reinforces its own sense of a story. And so when we come together in this kind of way, that's been, I guess, highlighted and pointed out, and how it's an illusion, really. When, of course, for the artificial self, its story feels very real. Yeah. So maybe in some way, in that, there can be maybe a loosening of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. A loosening of the story, and like just like just curiosity about like you just don't know. You don't know. Or I mean maybe just like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So Anuruddha says, what would a person do when the interest gets lesser to reach the final goal? Well, there's nothing that it can do because its whole you see, it can't stop seeking. Seeking comes to an end only when obviously the seeker comes to an end. So maybe what happens is that it starts to sink in the futility of its seeking, of trying to reach this idea that it has, which is just an image. It has an idea, what you're calling the goal. It's got this image of freedom or image of enlightenment or whatever you want to call it. And so it's trying to attain this image. And of course, it can never be that image. And it, as a separate sense, cannot cannot attain it, cannot be there when liberation seems to happen, because of course liberation is the end of that person. Goes on to say, hi Chris, putting effort or energy to mere isness, does it get lesser? What is really yearned for is this isness, is what is seeming to take place, whatever that is. And it's instant, it's immediate, it's the words being spoken, it's the sitting on a seat, standing up, walking, eating, drinking, certain feelings, emotions, thoughts. Whatever is taking place is that isness, is the totality. And the yearning really is for that, is for that wholeness. But the artificial self has an image it's trying to get somewhere else, so it can't see this, it overlooks this. So the attention and the energy gets put towards trying to create certain things or trying to fulfill a certain image, spiritual or otherwise. Okay. So we will bring it to an end there. So good to see everyone. Good to see everyone on Zoom. Good to see everyone on YouTube. And enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Take care, everyone.